So yeah, it's moving towards a lot of these newer horror movies, newer horror games, which is great. But it's also moving to something I know me and you enjoy, which is more of a kind of exploratory game where you're piecing together the story. And not just horror movies are doing this, but there's actually games out there that are doing this with they're not really horror elements. It's more of a actually telling like a coming of age story, or kind of more like an adventure. And one of the other games Chuck and Dice and I played was called Gone Home. Now, Gone Home was just recently released on the console not too long ago, probably like a few months ago. It's marked down on Steam as well. But if you like those type of games where you're more exploring and piecing together a story, I would recommend Gone Home. Now, Gone Home involves you being a like I say early 20s woman who comes home.
Yeah, you're a girl named Katie, and you're going home. Basically, you just were on this huge trip to Europe, so you're going home. And basically, what happens? It's this weird situation: is that while you're on vacation, your parents and your sister, your entire family moved to a different moved to a different house. There's gonna be a lot of spoilers on this. So if you haven't played Gone Home yet, I would advise you not to listen to this part in the podcast. Please go play Gone Home because it's actually a great game. Gone Home basically is about a girl named Katie. She's coming home from her big trip from Europe. The situation is that her parents actually moved while she was on vacation. She already knew about it. They weren't going to like move and say, hey, screw you, kid. But so you're coming home to a house that you know nothing about. So that kind of puts you into that mode of like mystery and such. So when you come home, you notice that the house is like essentially empty. There's a storm going on outside. You basically told your parents not to pick you up because you could find your own way. You're going to just take a cab from the airport. But yeah, no one is actually home at this time. You're basically all alone. And it's really up to you as the character to find out what happened? Like, where is everyone? The only clue so far that you get is a mysterious message. First, your message to your mom saying you don't need to be picked up. And two messages from a woman. One asking where your sister Sam is, which, you can make assumption who that is. My assumption was that was the mom. And then all of a sudden, a second message where it seems like a person like crying and asking, where Sam is, which, I assumed it was the mom again. So you think something strange is afoot. And like what this game is that you can pick up anything, but not every object can do anything. Like sometimes they're useless. You can pick up like a pack of Band-Aids, some toilet paper, a pillow, and you can do anything with it, but or you can basically carry it around with you. But it doesn't mean that it'll do something. There's other inventory types like keys that will just kind of go into your backpack, and then other times you're just opening these letters. And when you open these letters, it unlocks a narration of your sister talking about like her time at high school, the people that she's met, and just basically a little like slice of her life. And in other instances, you're reading letters. You're reading your dad's a writer. You're reading rejection letters for the one from publishers, and then you're reading letters that your mom's getting because she's actually from Canada, and she's getting letters from a friend, and they're talking about her job, her family, and a bunch of other stuff. What I liked about this game is that it kind of started out in a very like Resident Evil 7, a very horror-like setting. And you kind of get in that mode of like, is something scary going to happen? And the stuff happens like you're walking down a hallway and you hear voices, and you walk down and you find out it's just a television that was just left on. So, you turn it off and, you can explore the room to see if you can find any clues there. And by the way, this entire game takes place in 1995. So there's no smartphones or anything like that. There's barely internet. It's it's kind of like a throwback because I think you and I grew up in the 90s and we kind of remember some of the allusions to that era, like X-Files. If there's actually a point where you can pick up an old TV guide and look at all the television programs that were in there. So I like really enjoyed this game just because I thought it kind of unfolded a really interesting story, and I just love the format of it.
I actually was pleasantly surprised. I like you when I first started playing the game. I kind of shrugged a little bit because I'm like, God damn it, it's gonna be another goddamn horror game. Because it does start off very horror like. Actually, we probably stop saying horror, more like it started off very tension filled. Oh, it started off very tension filled, very unsettling. But yeah, as you play, it opens up. What I did, I really enjoyed this game, probably due to one, the setting. Like you said, me and you grew up in the night. We grew up in the late '80s, early '90s, so it was very the way they built the world in the game, as far as everything's throughout the house. You know, the whole Riot Girl movement. They had a lot of bands that were really that were very prominent in the '90s. They had like things like the X Files, things like that. So it was really cool to see that. It was very cool to see a throwback, but also I think what they did a good job is avoiding too much world building to where it would not age well. Uh, but I think they did a very good job incorporating that into the actual story, because the story involves your sister, and it's, I would say it's a very coming of age story, and it's also about coming of age and finding your identity. And I think that played a lot into kind of the notion in that kind of that time of that time period, you know. And what was I think what was really well done, though, what I couldn't get enough of, were actually uh, the audio call outs you unlock from the sister. And I know we talked about this before we started recording. The way her sister talks about uh, the relationship that's happening, with the people she meets in school, and especially with a certain somebody in the game, the way the relationship happens, it very much describes the way a lot of people. I mean, again, this might not be you, but this is something that I went through. The way a relationship starts off with how you first fall in love, and how you realize, the person you're friends with, just means much, much more to you than that. And I think that was really well done. It was very sweet. As far as the ending to it, I was expecting one thing, and I know me and you expected one thing, and it was we were kind of dreading it, but for it to go the completely different way was actually, we're actually really happy that it went that way, because it did a flip. This could have been a tragic tale, but it wasn't, and that was I think that was kind of the whole point of the game, was to kind of reinforce that there's always some kind of hope.
Like, just to give you a little bit of background, also, Gone Home does deal with a lot of your sister basically finds out that she's a lesbian, and she's like falling in love with a girl that she's best friends with, and she's known ever since Shira, as in her own words, which I think is a brilliant quote. And back in the '90s, it was pretty much less accepted to be homosexual and such. I had a friend who he was homosexual back in the '90s, and like basically kind of played it in the down low just because he knew what that outcome would result in, because there were people going out and like lynching these people. I should know because I'm from Kansas, and we're pretty much the hometown of the West Baptist Church, which was Fred Phelps. Fred Phelps was this inhuman being that would go out and basically protest. If there was any semblance of homosexuality in a location, he would show up with his protesters with signs that says, forgive my language, God hates fags, and such, and so forth.
I think there's a lot more support nowadays, and I thought, especially with this game. Honestly, I never thought a game like this would ever get made, let alone actually be sold. And it's gone on to actually make quite a bit of money. I mean, a lot of people love this game. Something like a game like this doesn't come around very often, but when you do get these kind of games, I mean, it especially hits a special mark, and I really appreciated that type of story. And also, coming as from somebody who's in a heterosexual relationship, it's nice to have that perspective. This is not something that, as a heterosexual person, you don't encounter. This is not something you go through. you don't know what you get to kind of be in somebody else's shoes, but it's also nice that I was able to relate to it in the way that it essentially just comes down to love.
I'm also heterosexual, but we're both of of different nationalities. You're Hispanic, I'm Asian, and we know that side of like people not understanding like cultural background, but like when you're in a situation of like of your sexual orientation, what is that like how does a person deal with that? And like in the 90s, of course, going back to my friend here, yeah, the parents automatically say, well, you haven't found the right guy, you're not a lesbian, this is not your identity. Basically, yeah, they're in denial, which definitely happened to my friend. The parents automatically went there and said, like, we're going to take you for counseling, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It was pretty much a nightmare for him back in the day, and like I couldn't imagine like any of that going through any of that with like your own parents.
I really feel, just to kind of go back to us talking about how it's nice to see this different perspective. I know this is something we touched upon, I think maybe 2 episodes ago, regarding, I believe, or it might have actually been a discussion pre-podcast recording. We were actually talking about how it's nowadays it's nice for Chuck and Dice and I. It's actually nice for us to see games and movies and television programs that have different perspectives, that are not just your generic white, white male protagonist. So it was nice to get this different perspective. Also, especially, from a woman's point of view, to be playing this game, and especially from the way the relationship was portrayed in this game. It wasn't something that was devious or wrong or sinful as ignorant people out there would want you to believe. It was actually a very touching story, and for me, like I said, for me as a heterosexual male, it was a very welcoming change of pace, and it was also really sweet